They thought he had dishonored her, and by sunrise, they came to pass judgment. Elias Whitaker stood barefoot on dry earth that hadn't seen rain in 11 months, staring at 200 Apache warriors lining the edge of his land like shadows carved from the dawn. Not one of them moved. Not one of them spoke. The wind carried the smell of dust and leather, and somewhere behind him, the loose hinge on his barn door tapped, slow, uneven, like a clock counting down something he could not stop. Elias didn't reach for a weapon. There was none, just his hands, cracked from years of soil that gave him nothing back. 12 hours earlier, he had been ready to leave it all behind. The crops had failed. The well had gone shallow. Even the mule had stopped looking at him like there was hope. He had one canteen left. One. He remembered weighing it in his hand, feeling the slosh of what little remained, knowing it meant one more day. Maybe two. Then he heard it. Not loud. Not clear. Just wrong. A sound that didn't belong to wind or wood or empty land. He followed it past the broken fence, past the dry well that hadn't given water in weeks. And that's where he saw her. A girl, no older than 17, curled against the earth like the land itself had tried to protect her. Her dress torn by brush, her breathing shallow, her skin warm in a way that spoke of fever. Apache. He knew that much from the patterns stitched into what remained of her clothing. For a long moment, Elias just stood there. Because out here, nothing came without a cost. Help someone, you inherit their trouble. Walk away, you keep your silence. The wind picked up, dragging dust across her face. She didn't move. Elias looked at the canteen in his hand, then back at her. Damn it, he muttered, more to the sky than anything else. He knelt beside her slowly, careful, like approaching something fragile and wild at the same time. Her eyes opened just a sliver. Dark, alert, afraid, not of the land, of him. That was the part that stayed with him. He raised his hands a little, showing empty palms, then tilted the canteen toward her lips. She hesitated, then drank. Not much, just enough to breathe again. He used his own shirt to wrap the worst of her wounds, tearing fabric with hands that had fixed fences and buried dreams. She flinched once, then went still, watching him like she was trying to decide what kind of man he was. Truth was, he wasn't sure himself anymore. He carried her back to the house, each step slow across the brittle ground, the sun dipping low behind him like it had already given up on tomorrow. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and old seasons. He laid her near the fire, added the last of his kindling, and sat across from her as night settled in. She didn't speak, didn't ask, didn't thank him, just watched. And just once she looked past him, toward the door, like she knew something he didn't. Elias followed her gaze into the darkness outside, but all he saw was wind and the long, empty stretch of land. He thought the hardest part was over. He thought saving her had cost him everything he had left. He was wrong, because before the first light touched the horizon, the land began to answer. The first rider did not step forward until the sun cleared the horizon, and when he did, the ground itself seemed to hold its breath. Elias stood where he was, just outside his door, the dry wood at his back and 200 silent figures in front of him stretching across the edge of his land like a line no man was meant to cross. The morning light revealed details the darkness had hidden. Painted markings, braided hair, eyes that did not wander. They were not here by accident. They had come with purpose. Elias swallowed once, slow, his throat dry in a way no water could fix. Behind him, he could hear a faint shift inside the house. Fabric brushing wood. A step, light but certain. He did not turn. Not yet. The rider stopped 10 feet away, close enough that Elias could see the lines carved into his face, not by age alone, but by decisions that carried weight. The man said something in a language Elias did not understand, his voice low, steady, like wind moving through canyon stone. No one else moved. The words hung in the air. Waiting. Elias shook his head once. I do not understand you, he said, his voice quieter than he expected. The rider studied him. Not his clothes. Not his land. Him. Then his gaze shifted past Elias, toward the open doorway. Everything changed in that moment. The tension did not rise. It tightened, like something being pulled to its limit without breaking. Elias felt it in his chest before he understood it. Slowly, he turned. She was standing there. Nayeli. The morning light caught in her dark hair, still loose from the night. her face pale but steady. The cloth he had wrapped around her arm was still there, stained but holding. Her eyes were no longer clouded with fever. They were clear, focused, and not afraid. Not of him, not of them. She stepped forward, one measured step at a time, passing Elias without hesitation. Close enough that he could feel the faint warmth of her presence, like the last ember of a fire that refused to go out. She did not look at him as she passed. That was the part that unsettled him most. She walked straight toward the rider, the man who had spoken, the man who now waited. When she stopped, the distance between them was small, but the space felt vast, filled with something Elias could not name. Nayeli spoke. Her voice carried across the quiet land, soft but unyielding. The language was not his, but the tone needed no translation. It held weight, authority. The rider listened. His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, just slightly, like a mountain acknowledging the wind. He replied, shorter this time, sharper. A question, Elias guessed. Nayeli answered without pause. And then, silence again. A long one. The kind that makes a man aware of every breath he takes, every beat of his heart. Elias realized then that all of this, every warrior, every eye, every moment, was not about him. Not yet. It was about her. The rider turned his head just enough to look at Elias again. Different this time. Not with judgment. Not yet. Something else. Something measured. Something waiting. Elias felt the weight of that look settle on him like dust on old wood. He did not move. He did not speak. Because out here, words did not decide what happened next. Something else did. Nayeli took one more step forward. And then she did something that made every man on that field shift, just slightly, like the ground itself had moved beneath them. She lowered her gaze and began to bend. She did not kneel the way a prisoner begs. She knelt the way a person remembers something sacred. Slow, deliberate, as if every inch between standing and the earth carried meaning. Elias felt his breath catch without knowing why. The warriors did not move, but the silence changed. It deepened, tightened, like the moment before a storm decides whether to break or pass. Nayeli lowered both knees into the dust, her head bowing just enough to show respect, but not surrender. That difference mattered. Even Elias could feel it. The rider in front of her did not speak. He did not reach for anything. He simply watched. The way a man watches something he did not expect, but understands immediately. Nayeli raised one hand slowly, palm open, then turned it toward Elias without looking back at him. The gesture was small, but it shifted the weight of the entire morning. Elias frowned, just slightly, confusion cutting through the tension. He had seen gestures like that before, in passing, in distant towns where traders and travelers spoke of tribes and customs he never thought would touch his life. But this felt different. This felt like he was standing inside something he was never meant to see. The rider followed her hand. His eyes settled on Elias again, but now there was no question in them. Only recognition. Not of who Elias was, but of what he had done. The man spoke again, his voice carrying farther this time, strong enough that even the horses behind him shifted their weight. A single phrase. Short. Final. And then it happened. One warrior, somewhere to the left, lowered himself to one knee. Then another. Then 5 more. The movement spread like wind through tall grass, quiet but unstoppable. In less than a breath, 200 men who had arrived like a wall of judgment now knelt in the dust of a failing farm. Elias did not understand the words. He did not understand the rules. But he understood this. This was not punishment. His chest tightened, not with fear this time, but something heavier. Something he had not felt in years. The kind of weight that comes when a man realizes he has been seen, truly seen, without asking for it. Nayeli remained kneeling for one more second, then rose slowly to her feet. When she turned this time, she looked at him, directly. No fear, no distance, just something steady, something clear. She stepped back toward him, closing the space between them with quiet certainty. Elias shifted his weight, unsure what to do with his hands, his voice, his place in whatever this had become. She stopped a few feet away, close enough that he could see the faint lines of exhaustion still on her face, the strength holding them back. She spoke then, in English, soft, careful. You gave water when there was none. The words were simple, but they landed harder than anything the warriors could have brought with them. Elias opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because what answer was there to that? He had not thought of it as anything. Not kindness. Not sacrifice. Just something a man does when he finds another person dying in the dirt. Nayeli continued, her voice steady despite the weight behind it. In my people, water is life. You gave life, when you had only enough for yourself. Elias glanced past her, at the 200 warriors still kneeling in silence. The morning sun had climbed higher now, casting long shadows behind them, stretching across his land like something new had taken root. They came, she said, turning slightly, acknowledging them without breaking the moment. Not to judge you. She paused, just long enough for the truth to settle into the dry air between them. They came because of you. Elias looked at the ground once, then back at her. The same land that had taken everything from him now held something he did not know how to carry. And for the first time in a long while, he did not feel alone. The wind moved again, but this time it did not feel empty. It carried something new across Elias Whitaker's land, something heavier than dust, something that settled into the cracks of the earth like it had always belonged there. He stood still, looking at the men who had knelt in silence where no one had ever knelt before, not for him, not for this broken stretch of land that most people rode past without a second glance. Nayeli remained in front of him, her presence steady, like a bridge between two worlds that had no reason to meet until now. Elias shifted his weight. Slowly, his boots pressing into soil that had given him nothing for years, and yet today it felt different beneath his feet, as if the ground itself was listening. You do not have to stay, he said quietly, the words rough but honest, because he did not know what else a man like him could offer to people like them. Nayeli studied him for a moment, then turned slightly, speaking again in her own language, her voice calm, but carrying a tone that moved through the warriors like a signal passed without sound. The kneeling figures did not rise immediately. Instead, the rider who had first stepped forward placed his hand over his chest, then lowered his head, a gesture simple in motion but vast in meaning. Only then did the others begin to stand, one by one, not in haste, not in disorder, but with a rhythm that felt intentional, respectful, as if they were leaving something behind rather than taking anything with them. Elias watched as the line that had once looked like judgment slowly reshaped into something else, something quieter, something that did not press against him but settled around him like a presence he could not quite name. A young warrior stepped forward from the group, carrying something wrapped in worn cloth. He approached without looking directly at Elias, stopping a few feet away before placing the bundle gently on the ground. No words, no explanation, just the act itself. Elias hesitated, then stepped closer, crouching slowly as if sudden movement might break whatever fragile understanding had formed in the air. He unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a small carved piece of wood, shaped like a water vessel, smooth from years of handling, its surface marked with symbols he did not understand but felt were not meant to be explained. He ran his thumb over it, feeling the grooves, the weight, the quiet intention behind it. When he looked up again, the young warrior had already stepped back, returning to his place without waiting for acknowledgement. Nayeli watched him, her expression unchanged, but her eyes held something deeper now, something that did not ask for thanks and did not need it. It means you are remembered, she said softly. Elias let out a slow breath he did not realize he had been holding. Remembered. The word lingered longer than anything else that had been said. That morning, out here, men disappeared into the land all the time, their names lost to wind and time, their stories carried nowhere. But this was different. The rider gave one final glance toward Elias, then turned his horse without command. The movement rippled outward, and the warriors followed, not in retreat, not in defeat, but in quiet completion, like something that had been set right without needing to be spoken. Elias stood there long after they began to fade into the horizon, the dust rising behind them soft and distant, until the land returned to its usual silence. But it was not the same silence. He looked down at the small carved vessel in his hand, then back at his dry fields, the broken fence, the house that had stood empty of meaning for too long. Behind him, Nayeli remained still, not leaving, not explaining. Just there. And for the first time in years, Elias understood something without needing anyone to tell him. Some things did not come back to life with rain. Some things came back to life with something far quieter. The dust settled slowly after they were gone. But something remained, something that did not lift with the wind or fade with distance. Elias Whitaker stood in the same place long after the last rider disappeared beyond the low ridge, the carved wooden vessel still resting in his palm, its weight small but impossible to ignore. The land stretched quiet again, the same cracked earth, the same brittle fence posts leaning like tired men, but it no longer felt empty. He turned the object over once more, tracing the symbols with his thumb, trying to understand something that was not meant to be explained in words. Behind him, the faint creak of the cabin door reminded him that he was not alone anymore. He glanced back. Nayeli had not moved far. She stood near the doorway, her posture relaxed now, but her eyes still carried that same quiet awareness, as if she saw more than what was in front of her. Elias cleared his throat slightly, the sound rough in the stillness. "You can stay," he said, not looking directly at her at first, because offering something felt different now, heavier than before. "It is not much, but it is yours if you need it." Nayeli tilted her head just slightly, studying him the way she had the night before, measuring something beyond his words. Then she stepped forward, slow and certain, closing the distance between them again. She glanced at the fields, then at the well, then back at him. "This land," she said quietly, "it is tired." Elias let out a faint breath, something close to a humorless smile touching the corner of his mouth. "That makes two of us," he replied, the words carrying more truth than he intended. Nayeli did not smile, but something in her expression softened, just enough to change the air between them. She walked past him, moving toward the dry well, her steps light but purposeful. Elias followed a few paces behind, unsure why he did, only that something about her presence made standing still feel wrong. She reached the edge of the well and knelt, brushing her fingers along the stone rim, feeling the heat trapped in it from yesterday's sun. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she looked down into the darkness below, where once there had been water enough to keep a man alive, enough to keep hope from leaving entirely. "How deep?" she asked without turning. "Used to be near 30 feet, Elias answered, his voice low. "Now, maybe a few inches, if anything at all." Nayeli nodded once, as if that confirmed something she already knew. She reached into the fold of her clothing and pulled out a small leather cord, worn smooth from years of use. At its end hung a bead, dull in color but shaped with care. She held it between her fingers for a moment, then let it rest against the stone. Elias watched, not interrupting, because there was something in the way she moved that made speaking feel unnecessary. The wind shifted again, softer this time, carrying a scent that had not passed through this land in a long while. Not rain. Not yet, but something close to it. Nayeli stood slowly, brushing the dust from her hands, and turned back toward him. "You gave life," she said again, quieter now, as if the words were not meant for him alone but for the land itself. "Sometimes, life returns in ways you do not expect." Elias looked at her, then at the well, then at the empty sky stretching wide above them. He had heard words like that before, in passing, in stories told by men who needed something to believe in. But standing there, with the carved vessel in his hand and the faint scent of something new in the air, it did not feel like a story. It felt like the beginning of something he could not yet see. He nodded once, slow, uncertain, but willing. Because out here, a man did not need to understand everything. He just needed to know when not to walk away. The day did not change all at once, but Elias felt it before he saw it, like something beneath the surface shifting quietly, waiting for the right moment to rise. The air carried a different weight now, not heavier, not lighter, just present in a way it had not been for months. He stood near the well, watching Nayeli as she stepped back from the stone edge, her eyes scanning the horizon as if she were listening to something far beyond what he could hear. Elias tightened his grip around the small carved vessel, then loosened it again, realizing he had been holding it too firmly, like he might break whatever it represented if he did not learn to carry it gently. "You speak like this land can hear you," he said after a moment, his voice low, careful, not mocking, just uncertain. Nayeli turned slightly, her gaze settling on him with quiet patience. "It does," she replied simply. No explanation, no attempt to convince. Just the statement, placed between them like something that did not need defense. Elias let out a slow breath, glancing toward the fields that had refused him for so long, rows of dry soil stretching under a sky that had given him nothing but light and heat. "Then it has been ignoring me for years," he said. Naeli walked past him again, her steps unhurried, stopping near the edge of the nearest row where the ground had cracked into patterns that looked almost deliberate, like something had tried to hold on and failed. She crouched, pressing her palm flat against the earth. Elias watched, the silence between them no longer empty but filled with small movements. The shift of wind through brittle grass, the faint creak of wood from the house behind them, the distant call of something alive far beyond the ridge. "You asked the land to give," Naeli said after a moment, her voice calm. "But you do not. Listen when it answers." Elias frowned slightly, stepping closer, the dry soil crunching beneath his boots. "What is it supposed to say?" he asked, not with frustration, but with the kind of tired curiosity that comes from wanting to understand something that has always remained out of reach. Naeli lifted her hand, letting the dust fall slowly through her fingers. "It already told you," she said, then looked at him, her eyes steady. "You just chose something else." The words settled into him deeper than he expected. Elias looked away, out across the land, replaying the last months in his mind, the choices made out of habit, out of fear, out of the quiet belief that nothing would change no matter what he did. He thought of the canteen, the last of the water, the moment he had hesitated before kneeling beside her, and the moment he had not walked away. He swallowed once, the realization not loud, not sudden, but undeniable. "That was not for the land," he said quietly. Naeli stood, brushing the remaining dust from her hands, then stepped closer until she stood beside him, both of them facing the same empty field. "No," she said. "It was not." Another pause. The wind shifted again, softer now, carrying a faint coolness that brushed against his skin and lingered just long enough to be noticed. Elias glanced upward, but the sky remained wide and pale, no clouds, no promise. Still, something had changed. He could feel it, not in the sky, in the space between moments. "What happens now?" he asked, not expecting a clear answer, but needing to ask anyway. Naeli did not look at him this time. Her gaze remained fixed on the land, as if watching something unfold that had not yet reached him. "Now," she said slowly, "you stop trying to take from the land." She paused, just long enough for the weight of that idea to settle. "And you begin to stand with it." Elias let those words sit where they landed, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. He nodded once, not because he fully understood, but because for the first time in a long while, he was willing to learn something new. The carved vessel in his hand felt different now, not like a gift, not like a symbol, but like a reminder. And as the wind moved across the dry field once more, Elias Whitaker stood still, not waiting for change, but ready for it. The first drop did not fall from the sky. It came from the well. Elias heard it before he saw it, a faint sound, almost too soft to matter, like a memory echoing from somewhere deep below the earth. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he stepped toward the stone edge, each footfall careful, as if the ground might shift if he moved too quickly. Naeli did not move. She simply watched him, her expression unchanged, as though this moment had already happened somewhere she understood. Elias reached the well and leaned forward, gripping the warm stone with both hands, peering into the darkness below. For a long second, there was nothing, just shadow, just the same emptiness he had stared into 100 times before. Then he heard it again, a single drop, clear, certain. His breath caught, not in disbelief, but in something quieter, something deeper, like recognition. He did not speak. He did not call out. He simply stood there, listening, as another drop followed, and then another, each one small, each one real. Behind him, the wind shifted, carrying a coolness that had not touched this land in longer than he could remember. He straightened slowly, turning back toward the fields, his eyes scanning the rows of dry soil. At first, nothing had changed. The same cracks, the same brittle texture, but then movement, not of the earth breaking, not of anything dramatic, but something subtler. The dust did not lift as easily when the wind passed over it. It settled faster. He stepped forward, crouching low, pressing his hand against the ground the way Naeli had done. It felt different, still dry, still rough, but no longer lifeless. Elias exhaled slowly, his hand lingering there as if he needed to be certain this was not something his mind had made up to protect itself from another disappointment. "It is not rain," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Naeli stepped closer, stopping just beside him, her gaze fixed on the same patch of earth. "Not yet," she replied. Elias nodded once, understanding that this was not about sudden change, not about the sky opening and solving everything at once. This was something else, something slower, something earned. He stood again, brushing the dust from his hands, his eyes drifting back to the horizon where the warriors had disappeared. The land looked the same, but it did not feel the same. He glanced at the carved vessel still in his hand, then back at the well, then at the rows of soil that had once been nothing more than failure. "I almost walked away," he said after a moment, his voice low, steady, carrying no regret, just truth. Naeli did not respond right away. She let the words settle, let them become part of the space between them before answering. "But you did not," she said. Elias looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her not as someone who had appeared in his life by chance, but as someone who had shifted it without force, without demand. "Neither did you," he replied. Naeli held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the land, her expression softening in a way that did not weaken her, but revealed something beneath the strength. The wind moved again, and this time it carried a scent Elias had not realized he missed until it touched him. Not rain, not yet, but the promise of it. He closed his eyes briefly, letting it settle, letting himself feel it without questioning it. When he opened them again, the land was still dry. The sky was still clear, but something had begun. Not loud, not fast, but certain. And for the first time in years, Elias Whitaker did not measure his future by what the land had taken from him. He measured it by what had just begun to return. By the time the sun reached its highest point, the change was no longer something Elias could question. It was something he could see, not in grand ways, not in anything a stranger riding past would notice, but in the details. The kind of details a man who had lived on the same land for years could not mistake. The soil no longer broke apart into powder at the lightest touch. When he pressed his boot down, it held its shape just a moment longer before settling. The air carried a faint coolness that lingered instead of vanishing. Even the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It felt patient. Elias moved slowly across the field, the carved wooden vessel tucked carefully into his palm, his thumb tracing its edge without thinking. Naeli walked a few steps ahead, her gaze scanning the ground, the horizon, the sky, as if reading something written in a language older than words. She stopped near the far edge of the field, where the soil had been the worst, where even weeds had refused to grow. Elias joined her, his eyes following hers to a small patch near a broken fence post. At first, he saw nothing. Just dirt. Just the same tired earth he had cursed under his breath more times than he could count. Then he noticed it. A faint line. Thin. Fragile. Barely there. He crouched slowly, lowering himself until he was close enough to see it clearly. A small green shoot had pushed its way through the surface. Not strong. Not tall. But alive. Elias did not touch it right away. He simply stared, his breath steady but deeper now, as if he needed to make space inside himself for what he was seeing. "That was not there yesterday," he said quietly. Naeli shook her head once. "No," she replied. Elias let out a slow breath, almost a laugh, but softer, quieter, something that did not need to be heard by anyone else. He reached out then, careful, placing his fingers in the soil beside the small plant, not on it, just near it, feeling the difference, the subtle strength returning to something he had thought was gone for good. He sat back on his heels, looking out across the rest of the field, imagining for the first time in years not what had failed, but what might grow. Behind them, the faint sound of water echoed again from the well, clearer now, more certain, like a rhythm settling into place. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, letting it fill the silence inside him. When he opened them, Naeli was watching him, not the land this time, but him. "You see it now," she said. It was not a question. Elias nodded slowly. "I do," he answered. He stood, brushing the dust from his hands, though it no longer clung to him the way it used to. He looked down at the carved vessel once more, then toward the well, then back at the small green shoot pushing through the soil. "I thought I needed rain," he said after a moment. Naeli tilted her head slightly. "You needed to give first," she replied. Elias, let those words settle, feeling their weight, their truth, not as something he had been told, but something he had lived without realizing it. The wind moved again, softer now, carrying that same faint scent, closer this time, like something approaching rather than passing by. He glanced up at the sky once more. Still clear, still wide, but different. Not empty, not distant, just waiting. Elias Whitaker stood in the middle of his land, not as a man trying to force life from it, but as someone finally standing with it. And somewhere beneath his feet, in the quiet darkness where he had once seen nothing, something continued to rise. The rain did not come as a storm. It arrived the way everything else had begun, quiet, patient, almost easy to miss if a man was not paying attention. Elias Whitaker felt it before he saw it, a faint cool touch against his skin, so light it could have been mistaken for wind. He stood still in the middle of his field, the small green chute at his feet, the carved vessel resting in his hand, and lifted his eyes to the sky. One drop, then another. Not enough to soak the ground, not enough to fill the well, but enough to be real, enough to matter. He did not move. He did not rush for cover. He simply stood there, letting each drop land where it would, on his hat, his shoulders, his hands, the same hands that had once tried to force life from this land and failed. Behind him, he could hear the faint, steady sound of water gathering below the well, no longer a distant echo, but something stronger, something certain. He turned his head slightly. Nayeli stood a few steps away, her face tilted upward, her eyes closed, as if she had been waiting not for the rain itself, but for this exact moment when it chose to return. Elias looked back at the land. The soil darkened slowly, unevenly, each drop marking a place where something had begun to change. The cracks that had once spread like scars did not vanish, but they softened, their edges losing the sharpness that had defined them for so long. He knelt again, pressing his hand into the earth, feeling the coolness seep into his palm, not as a flood, not as a sudden miracle, but as a promise, being kept one drop at a time. He let out a slow breath, his shoulders easing in a way he had not felt in years. "It is not much," he said quietly. Nayeli opened her eyes, glancing at him, then back at the land. "It is enough," she replied. Elias nodded, understanding that now. It was never about how much came at once. It was about whether it came at all. He stood again, the rain continuing in its quiet rhythm, and looked across the field where that single green shoot stood, small but unbroken. He imagined more beside it, then rose, then something greater than what he had allowed himself to imagine before. But he did not rush ahead in his mind. Not this time. This time, he stayed where he was, present, watching, learning. Nayeli stepped closer, stopping beside him, her presence no longer something unfamiliar, but something that belonged in the space beside him as naturally as the land itself. Neither of them spoke for a while. There was no need. The rain spoke in its own way. The land answered. And somewhere between those two things, something inside Elias settled into place. After a time, Nayeli turned slightly, her gaze moving toward the distant horizon where the riders had once stood. "My people will not return for this," she said softly. Elias followed her gaze, then looked back at the field, the well, the small signs of life beginning to show themselves where there had been none. "They already did what they came for," he answered. Nayeli nodded once, her expression calm, certain. She took a step back, then another, her movement quiet, unannounced, like the rain itself. Elias noticed, of course, but he did not reach out to stop her. He did not ask her to stay, because some things were not meant to be held, only understood. She paused near the edge of the field, turning back just once. Their eyes met. No words passed between them. None were needed. Then she continued on, her figure blending into the land, into the distance, until she was no longer separate from it at all. Elias stood alone again, but it was not the same kind of alone. He looked down at the carved vessel in his hand, then placed it carefully on the edge of the well, where the sound of rising water met the open air. The rain continued, steady now, gentle but sure. And Elias Whitaker, a man who had once believed this land had nothing left to give, stood in the middle of it and understood something simple, something quiet, something that did not need to be spoken. Out here, the land remembers. And when it does, it gives back.